following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Oshkosh Diaries. I'm Paul Esslinger, joined, of course, and always by Derek Kloiber, co-host. We hope you enjoyed the last two shows. We were interviewing Inky Jungwirth, and originally when we set out to interview Inky, we were going to do one show as we normally do, and the staff very astutely convinced me to do two shows, and I think it was about 1 minute after we were done with show number 2 that it was very, very apparent that two shows wasn't going to do it. We decided to do a number 3, and we do have Inky back tonight. So one, of the many things that Inky talked about in the two previous shows, the one thing that he really, really wanted to stress upon, and he does this very nicely, he goes out to talk to a lot of students in the area, and that's about his exploits in World War II. And he, along with many people, feel that speaking about those exploits is extremely important for people to understand what someone went through in World War II. And we have that individual that has firsthand knowledge, as he has been there, and wrote a book on that. So without any further ado, we're very happy once again to have Inky Jungwirth back. Inky, thanks again for coming and sitting down with us.
I'm glad to come.
Okay, well, as I just stated, we talked about many things about Oshkosh and, downtown and when you were young, and, you wanted to talk more about World War II, and, we discussed what we're going to do for the show, and basically we're going to turn over to you because we could probably do another 3 or 4 shows on all the knowledge that you have. So I'm just going to, let you kind of talk about things, and Derek and I might ask a few questions in between.
What I want to talk about is the invasion of the Philippine Islands. When MacArthur left the Philippines after he left Korea, he promised, "I shall return." And that was and I was one of the group of that. The 24th, I was a member of the 24th Infantry Division that was stationed in Esslinger, New Guinea. And we were assigned to land on the Philippine Islands on October 20th, 1944. Return to the Philippines as MacArthur promised the people of the Philippine Islands. What I want to tell you about is what an average infantryman in the Philippine Islands went through in 1944 and 1945. And from my experiences, I was a common infantryman at the time when we made the landing. And when we got to Esslinger to board our ships, when I looked out at that sea out of Esslinger, New Guinea, in the northern part of New Guinea, there must have been several hundred ships that we were going to make the landing in the Philippine Islands. There were battleships, cruisers, submarines, destroyers, you name it. From horizon to horizon, it must have been 100 to 200 ships. You couldn't count them. There were that many on them. And there were 4 divisions were going to make the landing on the Philippine Islands, and the 24th Infantry Division, which I was a part of, Company C, 2nd Battalion, 24th Infantry Division, we were going to make a landing at Tacloban, which was in the news here a year or two ago when it was with the floods and the tornado.
Oh, right, yeah.
When I had the thing. And Tacloban was going to be our thing. To be an infantryman in the Philippines, what I wanted to do is tell you what a typical infantryman went through in a landing on the Philippines. At Esslinger, they hauled us out to the ships. They were assault ships, and they had maybe 500 to 1,000 infantrymen on a ship. And those ships were surrounded by destroyers and and different types of other ships. And when you were on that ship, you were programmed, and they told you where you were going and and what you're supposed to do, what you avoid, what to avoid when you're landing. And it's fascinating. It's been the most fascinating part of my life is the landing of the Philippines because I survived it. We left we were going to make the landing on the 20th of October 1944. What we were originally scheduled were to do to land in Mindanao at Davao. And unknown to us at the time, the Army command had originally designed to land at Davao in Mindanao, which is some of the most beautiful beaches for landing purposes. And they finally decided to make a landing at Leyte for reasons I don't know. But it's a good thing they landed at Leyte in the initial landing because Davao and the Mindanao, the Japanese had, the Davao beaches were some of the best beaches in the world for landing operations. But the Japanese had surrounded Davao and the landing area with guns, with heavy guns.
Artillery and...
Yeah, and it would have been a disaster, as I'll recall later on, if we would have landed at Davao first. And it's a good thing they landed at the Philippines. We left, I think, October 18th from Hollandia, New Guinea. It took 2 days to sail to outskirts of Leyte. One of the most fascinating things in my life was watching the bombardment of Leyte before we made the initial landing. The battleships, we arrived in the morning about 10 o'clock in the morning off the shores of Leyte, about 2 miles off of Leyte. And unknown to us at the time, that Leyte had been lightly defended by the Japanese. But the Navy didn't know it at the time, and when we arrived at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the morning on October 20th, the bombardment of Leyte began. And every cruiser, every destroyer, every battleship shelled that island with thousands and thousands and thousands of shells. And we who were on the ships could watch the bombardment that was going on. And the battleships, one of the things I'll never forget is when the battleship shells, which are very big when they think, you could watch them arc through the sky. They were just a little black spot, and you could watch them arc through it. And they just shelled that island. It's a question why the island then exploded, because there was so much artillery.
Sure.
After the shelling stopped, we were to get into the landing craft. Now, to get into a landing craft off an assault ship, you had a rope ladder on the side of the ship.
Right.
And you had to crawl down that rope ladder onto the landing craft. Now, the problem with the rope ladders was the fact that you had maybe 60, 70 pounds on your back with your ammunition, with rations, and your rifle. And if you slipped off the ladder, you were so heavy, and if you missed the landing craft, which were bobbing up and down alongside the ship, and you went into the ocean, you were gone.
Sure.
You were dead. That was typical, I think. And the landing craft that they had for making the invasion were typical that you saw at Omaha Beach and all those places. They held maybe about 40 or 50 troops at the time, packed. And what you do, you would get into the landing craft, and then the landing craft would stay near the ship until all the landing craft would get in the line. Now, you're talking about 4 divisions of men, which is probably about 60, 70,000 men that are going to make the landing at Leyte. So the idea was all the landing craft would make the approach to Leyte in a line. It took a while to get all the troops off the ship into the landing craft, and you had a circle around the ship until all the craft were in line.
Right.
And then when all the lines, there was maybe hundreds of landing craft with the 4 divisions that were making the landing. My division, the 24th Infantry Division, was to make the landing at Tagloban, which was was the capital of Leyte.
Let me stop you just for a second, Inky. Put me in the mind of an infantry guy. Now, you're on this ship, you're watching these bombardments going on. You obviously know that there are many, many thousand Japanese on this island. You're getting on this, from this big boat onto this little boat, knowing that bullets are going to be whizzing by your head momentarily. How do you prepare yourself for that?
I had been in combat in New Guinea, and you develop a psychology that you're not afraid to die. You got to develop that, or you'll go crazy if you're scared to death. And that's for the training of an infantryman in the U.S. Army was so important.
But did that happen though? I mean, with some infantry guys?
Yeah, we have people go crazy, mental problems. You have to psych yourself up. So if you're going to die, you're going to die. Otherwise, you'll never make it.
That's amazing.
That's where the American, most of the public don't know, what even the guys in Iraq and Afghanistan are going through. You got to psych yourself up that you don't care if you die or not, because otherwise you're no good. You'll get good.
Right.
And you take your chances.
Okay, so you're on your ship and you're heading towards the island. Then.
Yeah, and one of the first things they told us, this is the funny thing, one of the first things they told us, do not go in. The Philippine Islands were filled with rice paddies. And the first thing on ship before we boarded our landing craft, they told us, be sure you stay out of the rice paddies, because in the rice paddies there was a parasite, and if it got into your orifices of your body, it was unhealthy to do, and it could kill you. And that's what I'll tell the story. Anyway, as the landing craft, maybe 11 o'clock in the morning, we're all in line. We headed for the shore. The bombardment stopped. And as we were about a mile or two from the shore. And I'll never forget that. Inwardly, you're scared, but being in combat before, like I mentioned, you develop a mentality to stay sane. That's it. You're a soldier. You're training. And I'll never forget that landing craft headed towards shore. The Japanese that were on the island were dropping mortar shells into the landing craft as it headed toward shore, and we could watch them if they explode in the water. Fortunately, they were very inaccurate at the time, and we made it safely to shore. One of the things I will never forget is that the shelling that the cruisers and destroyers and battleships had done at Leyte had scared the people of the Philippine Islands on Leyte, had scared the population. And what the population had done, they had headed for the beach to escape the shelling that was on the inland of Leyte. And as we approached the shore, I'll never forget that as long as I live. Here there were hundreds and hundreds of men, women, and children on the beaches that were supposed to land the craft on.
Oh, jeez.
It was a sight I'll never forget. I can see that today at all those women and children wondering what they're doing on the beach when we're approaching them and trying to fight the Japanese. But they were scared. They didn't have no place to go. If they went inside the island, the Japanese would kill them. So the only safe place the civilian population could go would be to the beaches. So here we're making a landing at the beaches at Leyte, and you're amidst the Philippine population from the island.
Wow.
I'll never forget that. Now the funny part is we made the landing, and it was relatively quiet because the Japanese at Leyte didn't expect us to land at Leyte. And with about 67,000 men approaching all the beaches at Leyte, they were unprepared for that many men to make the landing. And I will never forget that the Air Force, meanwhile, the U.S. Air Force, the pilots are P-38s, P-47s. The Japanese Zeros started attacking the ships. They started attacking the troops that were making the landing. And it was a magnificent sight to see our aircraft taking on these Japanese Zeros. One of the things about making a landing is pure bedlam. You don't know. There's aircraft fighting. There's shells. The Japanese are shelling you. You don't know. On all landings at beaches, units get separated from each other. It's total confusion, because the landing craft, the landing craft are operated by Navy men, and their job is to get us to shore and go back to the ship as quick as they can to take out their troops to thing. And it's pandemonium. Troops land on the wrong areas. They get mixed up and things like that. And that's what happened to us, is that we didn't know we were supposed to be part of my company, got scattered all over the beach. And we finally got together and recognized the people that were in our platoon, our company, and then we finally started pushing inland. As I mentioned, it's poor bedlam. You got Japanese trying to shoot you down, and our aircraft are trying to shoot their Japanese Zeros down, and you're scared to begin with. No human being that makes a landing can't say that they're not scared.
No.
Because you're scared. That's where being a part of a soldier was. I mentioned before that on the ship they told us not to go into the rice paddies because of the disease. The first thing we did when we hit the beach, the lieutenant in charge of our company took us to a rice paddy. And we had to cross the rice paddy. That rice paddy was probably about 1,000 yards wide. And the problem with going into the rice paddy, even though they told you on the ship, why they made us go to the rice paddy, I'll never know. In other words, we went to the rice paddy, and the rice paddies were about 3 or 4 feet deep, and we was only 5 feet deep. And what had happened as we went through the rice paddy, our shells had landed in the rice paddies and made holes in the bottom. And I remember, due to my short size, I would step in those holes made in the rice paddy, and I would go down completely into the hole. And the guy behind me, fortunately, was bigger than mine. He picked me up so I'd get on the ground. And that's the way we made across the rice paddy, about 1,000 yards. When we get to the end of the rice paddy, they forgot that the lieutenant told us we're in the wrong direction. So we had to go back. A typical operation in the U.S. Army that sometimes they didn't know what they were doing.
Well, was it true, Inky, that in the tales that I've heard, a lot of these second lieutenants were straight out of college,
That's
and
right.
they had absolutely no idea what they were doing?
Yep. What we did in the military at the time as veterans that had been in battles before, we called them 90-day wonders. It was the Army's plan. Second lieutenants were how should I say it? They were
nice.
Cannon fodder.
Cannon fodder.
Cannon fodder. And what the Army did, they needed second lieutenants, and they took a lot of enlisted men out of the Army units, and they would send them to Fort Benning, Georgia, and they would in 3 months they would give them 3 months training at Fort Benning, Georgia, and send them overseas. And us GIs that had been in combat a long time call them 90-day wonders, because in our minds, they didn't know what they were doing, And that's what happened, is that a lot of second lieutenants were inexperienced.
Well, I'm going to stop you right there, Inky. We got to take a break. When we get back, we're going to continue with Inky's exploits in the South Pacific during World War II. So please stay right there, and we'll be back in a couple minutes.
Oh, yeah, that was perfect.
On the surface, the simple pleasures in life are going on all around us. But inches beneath the surface, utility lines are carrying electricity, gas, and more to your home. Digger's Hotline helps avoid costly or dangerous mistakes. It doesn't matter how deep you're digging. Call 811 or click diggershotline.com 3 working days before you start your project, and we'll help take the risk out of digging. Protect your simple pleasures. Know what's below.
There is a place where history is captured in time, where the voices of past generations still discuss the days of success, of love, hope, and joy. Timeless, playful,
Welcome to my attic.
memorable. The Oshkosh Public Museum. Come for the sights, stay for the memories.
Hello and welcome back. We're talking to Inky Jungwirth about his exploits in World War II and specifically in the South Pacific. And we're right in the middle of one of Inky's stories. So Inky, let's return where you left off.
Yeah. I mentioned the second lieutenants that we call them 90-day wonders. That was the GI slang of the time, and they were good men. They didn't have enough. Many of them didn't have enough experience. In 90 days, you can't become
An officer.
an officer to do it that way. It takes experience. And I'll relate the stories. It so happened that after we had made the landing and had crossed the rice paddies and we had to come back because it was in the wrong direction, and there were Zeros and P-38 fighters above our heads firing at each other, trying to shoot each other down. It's pure bedlam. And that is typical of any landing in Canada. And it was the same thing on Omaha Beach and things like that. And what I was lucky was that while we were being strafed by Japanese and aircraft, etc., I had jumped underneath the tank that had been on the beach. It was parked there to escape the strafing. And when I got out of the tank, my company was gone because it's mass confusion when you're making a landing.
Right.
And when I think about it today, that saved my life because my company had started to move inland and they had been mortared and they had suffered casualties. And when I crawled out of the tank, I wanted to find the company and return back where it was. And I saw our mess sergeant. I recognized the mess sergeant from our company. I said, "Where did the company go?" He says, they're in the hills. You stay back, stay where it is. And when I think about it, I would have been mortared if I would have stayed with the company. That's the first time that I remembered that an unconscious act saved my life, because I don't know if I would have been mortared or not with the company. And the mess sergeant told me to stay by the tank. And the company come back, and then another story I want to tell you, the Japanese had snipers hidden in the palm trees on the island. And the captain of our company, when he come back from being mortared, he got some of us together. I was a corporal. He got some of us corporals together and some of the sergeant to tell him what the next mission would be. Well, that was a mistake that he made because the Japanese would aimed for officers that had bars. And it was a policy at the time in the Pacific, in the South Pacific, that you did not wear any insignia that showed your rank.
And you did not salute either, did you?
You did not salute. You didn't do nothing. You didn't do nothing. And because the Japanese snipers would pick out a captain or a second lieutenant or first lieutenant or a sergeant or a corporal, so you didn't have no stripes or nothing on you. And this one particular incident, right after we come back from the rice paddy, the captain of our company got some of us non-commissioned officers together. There was about 5 or 6 of us standing in a row. And that's where he made a mistake, because all of a sudden I saw our captain drop to the ground, and he was grabbing his arm. And what had happened, there was a Japanese sniper in a palm tree near the shore, and he figured out the way the captain was talking to us that he was an officer, and he zinged him in his arm, and he got what is known as $1 million wound. That's $1 million wound that disabled you, and you got
Sent home.
You got sent home. Now the resistance, the Japanese didn't expect us to land in the heavy with as many troops we had, so the resistance of the Japanese faded quite rapidly. And one of the things late at that time in October and November and December in that period of time is the typhoon season at that particular time of the year. And it rained, the typhoons, it rained and rained and rained, and it was
Miserable.
It was miserable. You were wet. Food was hard to get. Water was hard to get. But that's part of being an infantryman. Now I will go into this a little more detail. That we made a rapid advance onto the roads in the Philippines. There were crisscross roads. Most of them were, they had macadam-type roads, and we were bound to the roads, and we stuck to the roads. One incident as we hit the road, one incident I'll remember the rest of my life. To this day, I can see it just as plain as day. The night before, as we hit the macadam roads, the night before, the Japanese made a counterattack. There must have been about a company or 2 companies of Japanese that had walked down the side of the road to attack us who were marching down the road. And that night, our artillery and machine guns had noticed the Japanese moving down the ditches on the long side of the road, and they bombarded the Japanese. They tore the Japanese troops to pieces. They just blew, hundreds of them, they just blew it all up. And the next morning, we went down that road where the Japanese were attacking, and there were no Japanese on the road. And there we were alongside the road were the Japanese that had been slaughtered. There was heads. That's the plain truth. There was heads, intestines, eyes, arms, legs, thousands of parts that had blown the Japanese apart. And we were on the roads, and all of a sudden the Japanese counterattacked. This was a couple days out of Leyte, after we made the landing. The Japanese counterattacked us, and what we had to do, and they were attacking down the road, so we soldiers, we infantrymen, there were dozens and dozens of us. Our only salvation was to jump into that mess. Jumping into that mess of bodies that were alongside the road is something I'll never forget. I can see the heads, the legs, the arms, the intestines, the guts, everything. It was horrible. It was a horrible experience. And this is true of all infantrymen that went into battle. It was something that I just can visualize today that'll never go away. The smell. In the tropics, bodies rot in a matter of hours. And here we're pinned down amongst all these guts, intestines, and the whole thing. It scared us hell because the Japanese counterattacked. And also at the same time, we heard that there was 20,000 Japanese troops were heading down the road towards us that made the landing at the lady of my 24th Infantry Division. We're scared as hell. Here's 20,000 troops going down. Well, that was just a rumor of that. Then and it turned out that we made good progress fighting the Japanese. The only food we had was being dropped to us by C-47 planes. They would drop boxes of food. They would kick them out of the open doors of the plane, and the boxes would drop into the rice paddies or onto the field. A lot of them ended up in rice paddies and they were gone. But that's the only way we could get food with C-47s, because the rations we had initially, that was gone in a day or two because you only could carry so much. So they had to supply us with food by kicking the boxes of food out of C-47 airplanes. Now, as we advanced down the road, I'll remember one night that we advanced down the road, we had to cross a river, and it was starting to get dark, and about 10 of us had crossed the river across the river, and we got across the river, and then it was too dark for the rest of the troops to follow us. So 10 of us got across the river, and we crossed, and we expected to be attacked that night by the Japanese, because in the Southwest Pacific, the Japanese moved at night, and American troops stayed in the foxholes. But as we crossed the river, it was too dark to dig a foxhole, so that about 10 of us found a little mound on the other side of the river, and we fixed our bayonets to the rifle, and we sat in a circle waiting for the Japanese to attack us. Now talk about being an infantryman and then being scared, but being an infantryman and ready for do battle. The 10 of us sat all night long on top of that little mound waiting for the Japanese attack. It so happened that day we didn't get any food, but I had cracked open a coconut, and there was a lot of coconuts on the palm trees.
Sure.
And I had saved a little piece of coconut that I had saved from the opened coconut, and that night all I had to eat was that little piece of coconut. I can see that little piece of coconut. That was the only piece of food I had all day long.
Looked pretty tasty, didn't it?
Pretty tasty, fine. And we're sitting here waiting with our rifles and the bayonets, waiting for the Japanese attack. And thank God they didn't attack us. And the next morning, we heard the rest of our company come up, and the trucks were bringing us food. So we had a breakfast. That's the most beautiful sight I ever saw, to see that after a night of terror, sitting there waiting for a Japanese attack, and then to hear your trucks coming, reinforcements coming. What a relief it is.
Let me ask you something before you continue, Inky. Now, I've heard also that in these situations in the woods like this, that the Japanese would use these horrific sounds to scare the living daylights. I mean, did you hear any of that, or anyone?
Nope, never heard. There were at that particular time at Leyte, the Japanese had enough troops to stop us.
Okay.
So that come later.
Later on.
That come later on.
So it's the next day, and the good guys are arriving.
The good guys are arriving, and they're bringing us food. And the Japanese that initially had defended the beach were retreating to the interior. Leyte is a relatively small island, and they were retreating. Towards the western side. We landed on the eastern side of Leyte, and the Japanese were retreating to the western side of Leyte, because on the southwest corner of Leyte, that was heavily reinforced with Japanese troops that had been there before. And the Japanese were landing troops on the southwest coast to attack the 24th Infantry Division, the 1st Cavalry Division, and 2 other divisions that had made the initial landing, and they were really going to hit us with everything they had. What had saved us was that the aircraft carriers, fighter planes, had stopped the Japanese Zeros from attacking us, the infantry. That's the aircraft, the American aircraft and the initial landing of Leyte saved a lot of infantry troops, because with their shooting down of the Japanese Zeros and the bombers and things of that nature. And if it wouldn't have been for the American aircraft and the air superiority that the U.S. Air Force had at the particular time at Leyte, we would have been dead meat to do that.
Right.
We had air superiority at the time with the Japanese attack, and that was due to the aircraft carriers. And one of the main objectives of the landing at Leyte was to secure an airfield outside of Tacloban, which was the capital of Leyte, and we had secured that aircraft so that our U.S. aircraft could land on most bases, reload, get gassed up, and thing that.
Were those just mainly fighters, or was it fighters and bombers?
Fighters and bombers.
Fighters and bombers.
But the fighters were the main source of our protection, because we had a superiority at the time of fighter aircraft at the particular time. That was because of the aircraft carriers and the fact that we had secured the airfield at Tacloban, that they could land, refuel, rearm, and again get back up again. Now, Americans advanced very quickly at Leyte, quicker than expected. The problem was that because of the typhoon season at Leyte, the roads turned to mud and water. It rained almost every day that I recall. And you'd be on the road sometimes would be covered with 1 to 2, 3 feet of water. And what the Army did, they had at the time what they call, there were trucks that could ride on the road or either go into the water. They were a special type of vehicle that could disengage the road part, and they could engage a propeller that they could go in the thing.
Okay.
They were amphibian type truck, and that's what they used to go on when the water was so deep that you had to take these amphibious trucks, and they would haul you up to the next good road so that you could take it out. Now I got to tell a story. You get relieved. When you're in combat, you're not in combat all the time. It was the policy at the time in the Philippines that a regiment consists of 3 battalions. To attack, the 1st battalion would attack one day. The next day, the 2nd battalion would jump forward, and then so you never had to bear the brunt of being attacking every day, because then the 3rd battalion would leapfrog, take the attack. Then the 1st battalion would make the attack, the 2nd attack, 3rd attack, and that proved to be a very effective way fighting. And the Japanese had a problem with the muddy roads also, and the thing. And what was happening, that the Japanese were slowly being pushed back towards the southwestern part of Leyte. And it so happened that the first sergeant of the company didn't have a company clerk, and he needed somebody to do the records, and they found out from me that I had been a company clerk. And so the first sergeant of our company it took me out of the line.
It sounds like you're going to have a new job here.
I'm going to have a new job. I'm going to have a being company clerk and doing the first sergeant.
Well, I'm going to stop you right there, Inky. We're going to learn about Inky's company clerk job when we come up. We're going to take another break. We'll learn about the company clerk, and we'll come to a conclusion. Unfortunately, we'll come to a conclusion on number 3. Maybe it'll be number 4 or 5. We don't know, but stay tuned. We'll be right back.
On the surface, the simple pleasures in life are going on all around us. But inches beneath the surface, utility lines are carrying electricity, gas, and more to your home. Digger's Hotline helps avoid costly or dangerous mistakes. It doesn't matter how deep you're digging. Call 811 or click diggershotline.com 3 working days before you start your project, and we'll help take the risk out of digging. Protect your simple pleasures. Know what's below.
There is a place where history is captured in time, where the voices of past generations still discuss the days of success, of love, hope, and joy. Timeless, playful,
Welcome to my attic.
memorable. The Oshkosh Public Museum. Come for the sights, stay for the memories.
Hello and welcome back to Oshkosh Diaries. We're talking with Inky Jungwirth about his exploits at Leyte in World War II. And we learned that Inky is going to have a new job as a company clerk. So, Inky, why don't you tell us about the company clerk position?
Yeah. When they found out I had been experienced as a company clerk, the first sergeant needed somebody that had the records, because the Army in combat operates on paperwork. It's ridiculous, but the paperwork had to go to division headquarters every day. And they didn't have anybody that knew paperwork like I did, because of my experience with Company H in the 32nd Infantry Division and being company clerk. And so he made me the company clerk. Now, being a company clerk didn't mean you didn't go in combat. In the Philippine Islands, company clerks had to fight just like everybody else did. What was interesting about the clerk's job, one time the company was sent out to do on a mission, and I'll never forget this as long as my life, and it proved to me that I was a soldier. The company was going to make an attack against a Japanese position on a palm in the distance in a palm tree area, and the sergeant, as the company made an attack, he said, "Clarence, you take all these company records that he had in his backpack," he says, "we're going to jump off on an attack," he says, "and I want you to go I want you to stay here by a fallen palm tree." He said, "I want you to stay with these records, and we're going to jump off on an attack, and I want you to be here when I get back." And he led the company off on an attack, and the artillery was going, and the bombing was going on, and it was just a rainstorm. And at the same time, it was a thunderstorm. And I'm laying beside this palm tree shaking like a leaf because of all the artillery, and you can't imagine the pandemonium. This proved to me that I was still a soldier, because I stayed there. I thought sure as hell I was going to die, because of all you can't imagine the confusion that goes on with the Japanese mortars and things like that. But I stayed by that tree where he told me to stay, and about a couple hours later he came back, and I was still by that tree. And I said to the guy, "I think that's the bravest thing I've ever did," because the tendency was, with the bombardment and the shelling, the tendency was to get up and run back. That's human nature.
Right.
But this I stayed. Now, the interesting thing of being company clerk, that the 24th Infantry Division was being relieved by other infantry divisions that had made the landing. because we had pushed so far and been successful in our attempts. We were being replaced by another outfit, and our regiment was being in a rest area. And there was a little village that we had taken, that the 24th Infantry Division had taken, called the village of Harrow, Jaro. And we advanced to Harrow, and the other units that bypassed kept taking the Japanese. And we were in a rest area, and so the Japanese homes at that time, or the Filipino homes at that time, were built on stilts. Because of the heavy rains and flooding and typhoon season, all the Japanese homes were built on piles, so they'd be about 5 or 6 feet off the ground. And it so happened that in a quiet period, we went to Harrow, and the first sergeant and I set up our headquarters underneath a Japanese home. And it was a quiet period for us, for our section of for 24th Infantry Division. And we had about a week's rest at Harrow. We set our home out, our office underneath the Japanese home, and we got acquainted with the people. Now, a lot of Filipino people spoke English because Americans had occupied the Philippines since 1898. So a lot of Filipinos know English. And it so happened that that home that we had set up our office under happened to be the mayor of Harrow. He was the mayor of Harrow. And we got, in the week or two that we stayed there, we got to know the family. He had kids, and his wife spoke English, and he spoke English. So we became acquainted with the family. In fact, we would eat with the family. And it turned out that the mayor of Harrow, Lorenzo Robel, I'll never forget him, that was his name, Lorenzo Robel, I'll never forget him. He was about maybe 40 years old, and he invited us up to eat with the family, and he would tell us stories about the Japanese occupation. It turned out that he had been a double agent. He had made believe that he was for the Japanese, but meanwhile he was sending signals to the American security forces. Keep in mind that there were guerrilla forces in the Philippines that had been there since the Japanese surrender, and there were Americans leading those guerrilla forces, and they had radios, and he would advise those guerrilla forces what the Japanese were telling him. He was a double agent, but he was working for the Americans. He He would tell them what the Japanese were doing, and we became in a 2 weeks' time, we became friends with them, and do it that way. We got to know that.
Right.
And then after we left Harrow, we made the 24th Infantry Division advance towards what was known as Ormoc Valley. In Ormoc Valley on the southwest coast was a Japanese stronghold. And I had mentioned before that 20,000 troops were going to be landed Leyte on the southwest coast. Well, what our Air Force had done, they had gotten wind, or through the scouting aircraft, they had seen the Japanese transporters bring these troops in to the southwest corner of Ormoc Valley, and our aircraft destroyed the troop ships. They sunk them. They killed most of the Japanese that were made the landing. But Ormoc Valley became the battleground for the control of Leyte. The 32nd Infantry Division, my old infantry division, bypassed us to go into Ormoc Valley to relieve us. What the American Army did at the time in the Philippines, they would leapfrog divisions and regiments so that all the pressure wouldn't be on one unit, because one unit could be wiped out completely.
Right.
And that was a policy of leapfrogging. I mentioned leapfrogging battalions. They were leapfrog divisions. Now, here's an interesting note. The 1st Cavalry Division had made the landing at Leyte also. And as the 24th Infantry Division was pulling back to be relieved by the 1st Cavalry Division. I'm coming down a jungle trail in the Leyte, and the 1st Cavalry Division is going to relieve us. And who do I find on the middle of the trail as I crossed the crossing point? My cousin, first cousin. Wow. We hadn't seen each other for years. And Herbie Jungwirth, never forget him. He's in a nursing home now. But what are the chances of you meeting your first cousin in the middle of the Philippine Islands? It was a miracle.
Right.
And to this day, he's still alive yet. And when we've seen each other in the past, we often talk about the chances of first cousin meeting each other in the middle of the jungle in the Philippine Islands.
Well, Inky, we got about 6 minutes left, so why don't how did the United States finally, get this wrapped up in Leyte?
Then from Leyte, after we had conquered Leyte, we went to Luzon. We took Bataan. We took Corregidor, which was the Japanese were starting to fall back into the northern part of Luzon. Made a landing at Leyte, at Luzon, and then from Luzon we went down to Mindanao, which is the southernmost island of the island. I mentioned in the beginning at Davao Gulf we were going to make the landing. The Japanese had all the guns pointing towards the beach of Davao Gulf. What we did when we landed in Mindanao, we landed on the western end of Mindanao by boat, and I remember going down there because President Roosevelt had died on the ship. It was in April of 1944 when President Roosevelt died. When we got to the western part of Mindanao, here's all kinds of landing craft. We thought to ourselves, what are all these landing craft doing here? And what had happened, that our U.S. Army had found out that Davao was heavily fortified, so we were going to go up the Mindanao River, which ended near Davao. So we took landing craft up to the Mindanao River. It was like a cruise because the Japanese had never expected us to land on the western end of Mindanao. And we had...
Interrupt.
Oh.
All right, Ian. Let me see.
We lose on?
Yeah, I think he's got me on here.
Okay.
Somebody's birthday is today.
Oh, jeez. I can't
So
believe
everybody, can you cue up the pictures?
Pictures.
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you very much.
Maybe a happy
Thanks.
birthday more.
Thanks.
All right. Ian, can you get those pictures up? There they are. Happy birthday
Where in
to
the devil
you.
did you
Happy
get that?
birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear Paul. Happy birthday
Okay.
to you.
I want to apologize to the viewers right now. I had absolutely nothing to do with this, just so you know.
She told me before we sat down that it was going to interrupt the program.
Okay.
Everybody,
How much more of this do we have?
49 is a good number.
How old are you?
If my wife gave you these, we're going to have an issue.
Ooh,
How old
one
were ya?
never tells.
Yeah.
How old were you?
Right there, I was about
7,
six.
6,
Yeah.
7.
Yeah. That's when I was good
No,
looking.
8 or 9.
That was a while ago. Yeah, that's we don't have to put that up. That's my Dutch boy there.
High school graduation.
Yeah, graduation. Okay.
College.
That's I was a high school senior there, going to something, I don't remember what. Oh, that's a cabin up north. That's my great aunt's Cutlass Supreme. Now it's mine. I was washing it. It's a '67 Cutlass Supreme. Not sure where that was, but I wish I weighed that much again.
I think they do.
Okay. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate that. That's nice. Okay, so Inky, we got literally like 2 minutes. I wanted to ask you, how many troops did we lose at Leyte while you were there?
And that I don't remember.
You don't remember?
In combat, there was complete confusion.
Did you have any near death? I mean, did you have the bullets whizzing by your head?
Oh yeah. I was sitting in a foxhole, and all of a sudden, a piece of shrapnel from a shell come past my neck, and it hit my thumb. Why it didn't hit my neck, I'll never know. God knows. It hit my thumb, and it started to bleed, and it was a piece of shrapnel, hot shrapnel, red hot shrapnel, and it fell down my sleeve, and I grabbed it, and I got a great big burn out of it. And I thought, you get to the point where you're slightly wounded, you say, the hell with it. Pardon the language.
Yeah,
but
well.
you say, you know.
You just get mad then, right?
Huh?
You just get mad then and
You
just fight.
you just get mad. I grabbed it, and instead of going to the medics, I patched it up myself. My thumb was bleeding, and my arm was burning, and I patched it up myself. You have some medical equipment with you, like sulfa drug or things at that time that you put on it so you don't get affected, but you don't care. What I made the mistake, I should have went to the medics because I would have got 3 points for being wounded for going home sooner. But I never thought of it at the time because that's the mindset you develop after. It's a minor wound, you know, why worry about it, you know? Because I've seen guys with legs shot off and stomachs ripped open and things like that, you know. So it's a minor wound. Yeah.
Well, Inky, unfortunately, we are out of time. Once again, on behalf of myself, Derek, our whole staff, and everyone watching, you are a patriot. You're a hero. The things that you've gone through, quite frankly, we couldn't walk where you plowed. And we want to thank you for your service.
Thank you.
It's just wonderful having you here.
Thank you.
And you know, I hope maybe we can have you back in the future, and you know, keep giving those talks to the students.
Oh, yeah.
It's invaluable.
Yeah.
So with that, Derek and I have a couple of announcements, and I'm going to pass it over to Derek.
And if I can follow up that lovely birthday celebration
Yeah, that was beautiful.
adequately.
Oh God.
Check out our Facebook pages. I can't say it enough. The first Facebook page is Oshkosh Diaries. That is the official Facebook of this show. Check it out. Leave your feedback. Watch the newest episodes uploaded. The second Facebook would be Oshkosh Memories. Share your photos, your memories of this town. Check it out, please. And Paul, I think you're going to talk about the memorabilia show.
Yep, I promise this is my last time. We have the Oshkosh Antique Appraisal Show put on by the Oshkosh Memorabilia Club. It is March 29th. That's a Saturday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. That's over at the Oshkosh Senior Center. The Annex building, which is the north building, will be there appraising items that were made in Oshkosh or made for Oshkosh businesses. So bring your items over there, whether it be brewery items, milk items, postcards, et cetera, et cetera. If it has something to do with Oshkosh, we'd like to take a look at it. So with that, once again, we really, really want to thank Inky Jungwirth. He is a hero, patriot, and we're glad that he could be with us today. So with that, we hope you tune in again next time for another episode of Oshkosh Diaries. Thanks for watching. Where did you get those pictures?
We can't tell.